My name is Dr. Raoul McLaughlin, and my subject is trade beyond the Roman frontiers. I have published several books on this subject. I am a member of the Classical Association in Northern Ireland. The question is, did Nero find the source of the Nile? For information on ancient Africa, see my book, The Roman Empire and the Indian Ocean, Chapter 5, Beyond Egypt, the Nile Route and the African Kingdom of Meroe. Meroe and all of Nubia depended on the Nile and the flood created by its main tributaries. Yet no one knew where the Nile began or how far it extended into Africa, and this was a mystery that fascinated the Romans. As Pliny the Elder explains, the sources for the Nile have not been ascertained. It flows through scorching deserts for an immensely long distance, and it has only been explored by civilian investigators. We have discovered all other countries because of war. Roman accounts as to what might be found in Central Africa were fanciful. There were tales of flourishing forests filled with ebony trees, and a mountain called Chariot of the Gods, which rises to a great height and glows with eternal fires. This was probably the volcano at Erta Ale. Pliny repeated stories about pygmies who live amongst the marshes where the Nile rises, and goat-pans and satyrs that dwell in shady thickets in the hills of Ethiopia. By AD 60, the Emperor Nero and his advisors were searching for new forms of revenue to fund their spending plans. Territories in Africa seemed an attractive addition to the empire, as they offered abundant new sources of wealth and a route into unconquered regions. Nero decided to send an expedition to determine opportunities for a military venture into Africa and discover the source of the Nile. A party of explorers was recruited from the Praetorian Guard under the command of senior centurions and a tribune. In AD 61, the group left Roman territory in Egypt and headed south to seek an audience with the king of Meroe. The Roman statesman Seneca, keen to ingratiate himself with Nero, wrote, "I have myself heard from their own mouths the story told by the two officers sent to investigate the sources of the Nile by our good Emperor Nero, a ruler devoted to virtue in every form, but especially solicitous in the interests of truth." But Pliny hints at the true purpose of the mission when he writes, "An exploring party of Praetorian troops under the command of a tribune has been recently dispatched by the Emperor Nero. It seems that, amongst his other wars, he was actually contemplating an attack on Ethiopia." Posing as diplomats and explorers, the Roman party took a note of distances and resources on an estimated 945-mile trek from Syene to Meroe. The group had used ancient Greek and Egyptian texts to assemble a list of about 25 urban centers on the Nubian Nile. But they discovered that most of these settlements were long abandoned due to a deteriorating environment. They reported that, in present times, hardly any of these sites still exist on either side of the river. Examining the ruins, the Romans realized that this decline had occurred many centuries before their own period. Pliny thought that Nubia might have been decimated by ancient conflicts between the African kings and the Egyptian pharaohs. He argued, "It was not Rome that made this country a desert. Ethiopia was worn out by alternative periods of dominance and subjection in a series of wars with Egypt, having been a famous and powerful country even down to the time of the Trojan Wars." Beyond the fourth and fifth cataract, the explorers passed tree-lined islands in the Nile, inhabited by parakeets, monkeys, and baboons. The Nubian desert ended near the outskirts of Meroe, and the land became fertile and forested. They noted that greener herbage begins near the city, and stretches of forest come into view where the tracks of rhinoceroses and elephants can be seen. The Romans learned that there were other towns in the region connected by river tributaries and overland trails. At Meroe, the Roman party was given an audience at the royal court and received approval for their mission to explore the southern reaches of the Nile River. The king offered them support, including letters of recommendation to guarantee their safe passage through vassal states on the southern parts of his realm. He might have provided the Romans with African guides and perhaps a military escort. Seneca reports that the king supplied them with assistance and gave them letters of introduction to the neighboring rulers. Then they set out on their long journey into the center of Africa. From Meroe, the Roman party traveled 600 miles up the White Nile until they reached the almost impenetrable swamp-like Sud in what is now southern Sudan, a fetid wetland filled with ferns, papyrus reeds, and thick mats of rotting vegetation. In the rainy season it covers an area larger than England, with a vast humid swamp teeming with mosquitoes and other insects. The only large animals in the Sud were the crocodiles and hippos that occupied the muddy pools within this expanse. Those who entered this region had to endure severe heat and risk disease and starvation. The Sud was too deep to be safely crossed on foot, but the water was too shallow to be explored any further by boat. The explorers reached an area where the swamp could only bear a small boat containing one person. At this point, the party despaired of ever finding a definitive source for the Nile, and turned back reluctantly to report their findings to the emperor in Rome. They had probably reached a position nearly 1,500 miles south of the Roman-Egyptian border. On their return to Italy, the Roman explorers told Seneca, "We came to great swamps, the border of which even the natives did not know. We could not find the limits of this place. The river was completely entangled with vegetable growth, and the waters were impassable by foot because of the muddy undergrowth." The soldiers were questioned about the source of the Nile by Nero himself. They prudently told him, "We personally saw 2 rocks from which an immense quantity of water issued." Seneca was skeptical, and although he remained silent, he thought that this might be one of several rivers rising from some underground origin. From the reports given by the party, Roman cartographers prepared a diagram that outlined the main routes into sub-Saharan Africa. Pliny describes this object as the schematic plan of Ethiopia recently presented to the Emperor Nero. Despite these reports of deserts and swamps, Nero still had ambitions for an African conquest, and sent imperial agents into the Meroitic kingdom to determine opportunities for further action. Dio Cassius explains that the Emperor Nero hoped the region might submit to him of their own accord, through a process of increasing political contacts. But Nero's spies reported that the subjugation of these regions would demand extensive time and effort. Meanwhile, the emperor had staged dramatic events in Rome, where he appeared surrounded entirely by African subjects. Dio Cassius describes how Nero arranged for the benefit of the visiting king of Armenia a most brilliant and costly affair, when on a single day only Ethiopians, men, women, and children were permitted into the theatre. Preparations for war began when Nero transferred military units into Egypt, including the 15th Apollonian Legion and a newly raised auxiliary unit. In AD 64, Nero exiled the governor of Egypt for daring to use the imperial bathhouse constructed for his arrival in Alexandria. Tacitus describes how Nero became obsessed with his secret plans for eastern provinces, especially Egypt, and on one occasion he notified the citizens of Rome that he was going away. Nero's departure was postponed when he was overcome with fear on a visit to the Temple of Vesta in Rome and began to tremble. Nero claimed that his presence was needed with his people. He might still have launched his African campaign, but in AD 66, Roman military attention became focused on a major Jewish revolt in the Near East. Nero was deposed and committed suicide in AD 68, and the empire descended into civil war with the Year of the Four Emperors. Roman ambitions to occupy and possess the wealth of distant African kingdoms therefore remained unfulfilled. For further information, see my book, The Roman Empire and the Indian Ocean. Follow the link below this video. Thank you.